How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great dialogue today. We are going to be talking about 5 tips when it comes to dealing with inmate discipline. This is a very needed topic because this is pretty much what we do. We are hired to hold people accountable. And this is going to be a great dialogue. 5 good tips that I think will aid in your ability to be more effective at holding inmates accountable. My guest today is going to be Russ Hamilton, but before I have him come on, let me go ahead and introduce our sponsors. First sponsor is American Military University. If you guys are looking for a degree, seeking higher education, please check out American Military University. They're very supportive of what we do on Tier Talk here, but they're also very supportive of what we do in corrections in general. So if you want to bring experience into the classroom, guys, get that degree. Check out American Military University. We also have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. That is available. That is doing very well. It is selling. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's used for training all across the country, which is great. The link to that is in the description. Right now, you can find that on Amazon. I got my second book, which was republished. It's going through a company called Blue 360 Media. I'm excited. I should get my hands on the final manuscript sometime this week. And then eventually it's going to be posted up on their website for sale. It's going to look a lot better. It's going to be reformatted. It's going to be something that you can hold into your hand that just has tons of advice, like that little journal that I wish I had when I entered this profession. It's got tons of tips, not just from me, but from many other professionals in the field. And to be honest with you guys, I mean, this is something, if you're going to make this a career, you want to have this in your hands. If not from day one, you could, even take it as you progress in your career, because there's information that's in this book that's not just for newbies, obviously. It's for anyone. It's in-depth perspectives from just people that have learned to evaluate their experiences and find a way to translate it for it to be taught to others. So again, if you guys want to check out what this publishing company has, I do have the link to that in the description. So you can check out the company Blue 360 Media. Then when the book gets out, I will go ahead and post up the link of the book. And then hopefully we get that book out into the right hands and we just start learning. I think this career is just an amazing career, a lot to learn. So I'm proud of that book. That to me was a great accomplishment. I just didn't like what Amazon did, unfortunately, but I had no choice at the time. And now I have a company that does see value in the book, and they're making it look better. I mean, that's pretty cool. Russ!
Anthony, how you doing, sir?
What's up, Russ? Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Not at all. My name is Russ Hamilton. I'm a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Started my career way back at San Quentin back in the 80s. Eventually I transferred and promoted and retired, and then got a job as a senior correctional officer with a juvenile correctional facility here in Northern California. And then after that, I went on to work for a private company where we do rehabilitation and reentry work for a local probation department and a local jail where I'm the case manager.
Hey, Russ, how's Keepers of Chaos going on Facebook?
Keepers is by and far the best correctional forum on Facebook. And I say that because I think that we do more with regards to, actually promoting the profession, and, not just the badges, but everybody that does part of the profession, everybody that, is out there, working in and around the inmates, trying to make everybody a little bit safer, trying to give everybody, some tips, some tricks, and some knowledge and history, even with regards to this great profession. And so I'm always jazzed about what's going on in my own little fiefdom there.
Yeah, and I love being a part of that great community. I mean, everyone there is a mentor. I mean, it's just the amount of support that you could find in that group is amazing. So, Russ, the topic today, we thought today was 5 tips when it comes to dealing with inmate discipline. And Russ, you'd have to agree, Russ. I mean, this is a big part of our job, correct? In working in corrections?
Yeah, inmate discipline is really sort of the linchpin that gives us the leverage that we need to tamp down a lot of the violence and things that happen inside the prison. It gives the inmates an actual incentive to not do some of those violent actions that they're involved in. It's a little bit more of a pro-social construct rather than just, kind of doing things at our whim, trying to keep the peace and whatnot. For many years, I was, actually the disciplinary officer in our unit. And so it was incumbent upon me to kind of make sure that, we complied with all the things that were necessary for doing inmate discipline. And, on top of that, making sure that, people's writing skills were up to snuff and that we were, bringing the receipts to make sure that we got those guilty actions in everything that happened with regards to the incidents that happened on our unit.
Yeah, guys, remember, discipline is a constructive effort, but when it comes to dealing with the inmate population, there's a level of accountability, but also safety and security that's intertwined with that. So in our efforts to protect the population, especially if it's something that the inmate could be violent, and now we're trying to hold the inmate accountable for their acts of aggression. Well, yeah, there is going to be what makes people may seem at first to think that it's punitive, but it's not. It's an effort to protect. So sometimes those disciplines are written so we can go ahead and remove that inmate through proper documentation and then place them in an area separate from everybody else until we can figure out what's going on and how best to meet the needs of that inmate. So I want people to know that you can't just look at the consequences and think that the discipline procedure is strictly punitive. It's not. There's a lot that goes in there in which a decision is made is not just what's best for the inmate who's being charged, because that is taken into account, but also the rest of the population that we also have to keep safe. Would you agree with that, Russ? It's like a partnership of, yes, there is some level of being punitive and holding the inmate accountable, but we also have to be mindful that in the end, we also have to provide safety and security. And those charges are what gives us the documentation to, let's say, pick up an inmate from one area and then secure them in restorative housing until we can figure out how best to reintroduce that inmate back to general population.
Yeah, there is a lot of detail to this thing because, it's not just about, inmates that maybe do something violent. It's, inmates that just for whatever reason, they're not behaving. And so at all levels, we want to be able to hold them to account. And yeah, some people, they get caught up in worrying about, oh, we're being too punitive. But punitive is part of holding people accountable. And we have to be able to do those things. Otherwise, our penal institutions would cease to function. So, part of it is a way for, inmates to be held accountable. But within accountability is also generally a way for them to get back. As an example, one of the things that we would do from time to time is we would take, we would have what we call forfeiture of work time credits. And good time that they had was taken away from them. Well, depending on the charge, if it wasn't too serious, we could give those back as long as the inmates came back into compliance and were able to show that they had once again re-entered in a way where their behavior was no longer an issue for us. So there's a lot of different reasons that we do that. And that accountability, though, does allow them at times to be able to get back on track.
Yeah, and again, guys, discipline is a deterrence. We try for it to be a deterrence, but also it is both a proactive and a reactive measure. It is. It's kind of got the deterrent side of it all, but it is proactive in case that person is a threat. What do we do with them? And then it's also a reactive measure because obviously they do something where we're reacting to what they have done. So it kind of covers the gamut in regards to managing a correctional facility. It's a big process. It's a big part of what we do in running a jail and a prison. All right. So first thing off the bat, let's talk about the mindset when writing a charge. I know times have changed and a lot of people feel that we're we're a lot softer in how we enforce the rules, or a lot softer. And when we're writing charges, inmates are now finding ways to beat the charges. And obviously there could be many variables behind why an inmate may beat a discipline. But the one thing that should never change is you should never become disenfranchised with holding inmates accountable. This is not a win-loss process. In the end, guys, regardless of the outcome, your job is to commit to the effort. And I know that could be frustrating. I know it could be, because, again, we're not in control of what the outcome may be. All we could do is put our best step forward, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of what those best steps are, and then let the process unfold. At that point there, if you start getting disenfranchised because you're taking it as a win-loss, then you're going to stop doing what your number one function is. Regardless of the outcome, your number one function is to hold inmates accountable. Now, granted, there are going to be people that are watching it. Well, also management has to hold inmates accountable, and I get that. We understand that. But right now, I'm talking about you. Management can't hold inmates accountable if you're not doing your job either. So having said that, hold inmates accountable and be persistent with it, and make it harder for those too soft managers, let's say the managers that are too soft, to throw every one of these away. I mean, my biggest concern is that when you get disenfranchised because you do have a system, let's say it's getting soft, then all of a sudden you stop writing them, and it's like, well, they're going to throw it out anyway. Yeah, but you know what? Keep on doing it. Keep on doing it, because that's documentation later on that can be utilized regardless of the outcome. You could find some way to utilize that to say, hey, we have done these things, and at this point, management's not doing their part in supporting our efforts. But the key is your job is to hold inmates accountable regardless of the outcome. You are in control of your effort in doing that. This is not a win-loss process. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, this is one of those things. I see people a lot of times, that they complain about what the hearing officer did. From my point of view, oftentimes it's really not about the hearing officer. That's not to say that I haven't seen some ones that were, sketchy with regard to what they did. But you know what? If you give them a good product, a good report, good evidence, and you put everything together in such a way that you can get beyond whatever, the bar is, whether your particular one is reasonable doubt. Ours wasn't. Ours was just, a higher probability that they'd committed the offense than not. Preponderance of evidence is what it's called.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Never mind, you got it. I was going to say some are reasonable doubt. Ours we utilize is preponderance of evidence.
Right. So there's no reason with a standard that's not that hard to meet. It's a pretty good standard for both the inmates and for us. There's no reason that you can't put together, a product that's going to, put you over the top. If you can't do that, my question is why are you writing the charge in the first place? And when and knowing what my product is, what my skill sets were with regards to writing and producing evidence and sometimes investigating these things, there was never a doubt in my mind that it was going to be a slam dunk all the way. And if I ever had one rejected, you can be sure that I would be making sure that someone was holding that hearing officer's feet to the fire. Because in my mind, at least, they had done something, kind of out of bounds. We had a review process that was really good, though. And so those kind of things were few and far between, as long as you know what the game is about. And the game for you is to produce a product that gets you above that threshold of the preponderance of evidence.
Yes. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. That kind of crosses into the next tip. Each inmate discipline is a process towards staff growth and development. I mean, one of the things, as I mentioned in the caveat before, the tip before was it's not a win-loss, and it's not. You can't look at it that way, because you will run yourself thin very quick. Because if you're tied into this and your emotions are brought into each and every charge, the problem is you're going to wear yourself thin very quick, because you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. I mean, yeah, it could be the amount of effort that you put into it, which should always be 110%, especially if you're, doing the right thing and holding the person accountable. You are going to get what you put in. Or, I mean, there could be variables that you don't know that could come into play, and we'll talk about it later in the due process aspect, where it's not that they're not guilty, it's just that there's a violation of due process that now has to be considered. And unfortunately, and we'll get to that, that also happens. And I'll give some examples when we get to that, because that's the final tip when it comes to provide for due process. But with that said, guys, if you are interesting in learning and you don't have that win-loss, you kind of have the fact that I'm looking to grow, then it's okay to follow up on the charges to see what went wrong and then see if there's something that you could do better. Or maybe it's not about you doing something better, maybe a better understanding of the system and why the charge had to be forgiven. But either way, I think for me, each time I made the effort to write a charge, it wasn't the fact that I was chasing an outcome. It was the fact that, you know what, I can go ahead and be better every day by go ahead and continue the effort, practicing my report writing and doing what needs to be done, because in the end, that is a main function that you have to handle. So if ever there's a chance to go ahead and try your best to strive for perfection, I'm not saying you'll ever be perfect, but to strive for perfection, that's a good thing to kind of practice. You know, if there's an inmate doing something foolish, hold them accountable, write your report, see where it goes, and then learn from it. And then, you know, regardless of the outcome, move on to the next one. I mean, that's just sort of how it works. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, this is one of those things where if you really want to be effective, you have to put forth the effort. And so part of the effort is always developing the most amount of evidence that you can in any given situation. I would always include something, if I could at all, what the inmate said in the heat of the moment, something that lends credence to what was going on, perhaps. I would always make sure that I tried to get something in there about, what his body language was telling me, if possible. If I could make that fly at the moment, I would always try and put something, in there that would, really try and make a difference for that tipping point. If I didn't think that I was close enough to that preponderance of evidence. So what you really have to do is you have to be willing to bring the kitchen sink and throw that in there too. You want all of those things to stack up. I had a issue with an inmate where we were investigating a substance that he had in his locker, which turned out to be nothing. And I'll spare you all the gory details, but basically, he got mad at me, and his big idea was to come to the chow hall and stab me that night. And instead, he got kind of like cordoned off and sent the other direction, and he just couldn't contain himself anymore. But he was also mad at his bunkie, and his bunkie was right there. And he ended up stabbing his bunkie in the neck instead of me, thank goodness. But one of the things that he said as they were leading him away is try breathing through that whole UMFer and stuff. And even though we had the cameras and we had everything else, I made sure right away, hey, put that in the report. I heard it too. I'm going to put it in my report, what was heard, because that just lends credence. We didn't get the wrong guy. The guy didn't already have a stab wound there, this is what an attorney is going to say, right? Oh, he already had that injury there. No, we know for a fact that, he put it there. And one of the things that kind of gives us that little extra bit was him saying, hey, breathe through that hole. So we want to bring everything that we can to make this product the best that we can when we're going to charge an inmate for a crime.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about specifically proper documentation. That is in here, guys. It's coming up. It's in tip 4. But having said that, guys, I mean, the key here is this is a growth and development process. It's not meant to be personal. And the last thing you want to do, guys, and it kind of crosses into this, is you're not writing charges because it's personal. I mean, you got to be patient in this game. Please be patient. Patient gives you some level of control. Don't be impulsive. Don't be writing charges because this inmate beat one yesterday and I'm going to get him today. No, I mean, you have all time in the world. Just be patient. Discipline technically is not meant to be personal. It's not meant to be personal. It's meant to document your efforts. That's what it is. It's meant to document your efforts to do your job. I mean, I look at it that way as well. Besides holding inmates accountable, it can also be utilized to document your efforts in doing your job, which could be great later on. You never know. But having said that, be patient. Don't look to make this a personal thing. Once you start seeing this as competition where win-loss, because inmates will love to come up to you and tell you, I beat your charge, and they'll love to say that. And you just got to kind of like, okay, it is what it is. I did my job, you did your job, and if there's another time, there's another time. But the point is, again, it's not so much, the fact that you want to chase after it so you can go ahead and go after that inmate. No, it's more of what can I do better in the functions of this part of my job. That's the key. So, I mean, again, it's a constant learning process. This I wanted to put in, and we discussed it before, but I want to do this again just in case. But don't be led to feel guilty for writing an inmate charge. And again, this falls back into the mindset of it all, is when it comes to holding individuals accountable, inmates may find ways they know they've committed to something wrong, but then they'll shift the responsibility over to you in regards to how you got to give them the consequences for what they've done wrong. An example would be, you got an inmate that's prepared to have visits, and maybe right before they have visits, you catch them doing something they're not supposed to be doing. You write them up a charge, and the inmate comes up and says, well, Gangi, if you write me, I'm not going to be able to see my kids, and, you're a father. And it's like, hey, my job is to still hold you accountable. Maybe next time around, you'll do something correct, because it was that important. You wouldn't have done that to begin with. So at that point here, you could tell your kids next time why you couldn't see them. And it better not be because I wrote you a charge. It should be what happened before that, which is what led to the charge. And real quick, this kind of goes to all the Oprah discussions when she talks about solitary confinement, and she makes it look like, where Neanderthals putting these people in the hole for like no reason and trying to show levels of guilt, or trying to get sympathy from, the people on the outside. But what they never tell you is what the person did to get into those cells, which to me matters. So again, part of the level of holding accountability is not accepting the responsibility of their actions. It's technically, no, you did it. You're responsible. Don't try to put that on me, and I'm going to continue doing my job and holding you accountable. That shift of responsibility is what they will do all the time in an effort to deter you from doing your job. So I'm very connected to that one because I've seen it happen. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, the disciplinary process overall is one of our best tools, right? One of our best tools to keep people in line, not just individually, but in mass too. And one of the reasons for that is depending on which department you work for, of course, you can actually cost people, sometimes up to a year of time, based on a single incident. And so when you're looking at those things, just absolutely, when an inmate's trying to manipulate you and say, hey, please don't write me, it's just a little bit of toilet wine, it's just a little bit of Pruno, it's just, half a marijuana cigarette, something like that. The question really becomes, once again, where is the line of accountability? How come their choice doesn't count, but mine does, with regards to deciding that I'm going to write them the charge? So, you know what? Don't back off. This is a tool that you should be using all the time. That doesn't mean that you have to write every single thing that comes down the pike. But what it does mean is you want to use it, and you want to make sure that it holds these people accountable as we go through the process, and that you can actually use it to create a better atmosphere inside your prison, your jail, whatever, because now there is an instilled discipline. There is structure. There is, what comes from knowing that there's a price to be paid for doing wrong.
Yeah. Now, guys, these last two tips are more of the practical side, probably the very important tips. I want to make sure we get those mindset right. But this comes to the actual, let's make sure we do our job to ensure that the discipline sticks. So these both were Russ's. So first one, Russ, is pick the right charge, proper documentation.
So excuse me. One of the things that, I see from officers typically is they will either pick the wrong charge that they're trying to get a guy for, or they will try and overcharge them. And so that's not something that we want to do. We don't want to go chasing the charge and include, that kitchen sink effect that I talked about, which is usually pretty good, and just try and, ride in a charge that's not applicable. You go charging a guy, oh, I want to charge him for battery. Well, battery, battery means they had to make contact. They had to intend to, do some kind of harm, when actually, all that happened is he kind of, bumped into you and it wasn't even intentional. We can't go throwing that on some guy, right? We have to find the right and appropriate charge. I'll never forget doing one where I had an inmate that had hid out in preparation to escape. And fortunately, I was able to find this individual. And, I don't even know, I can't even comprehend to this day what the lieutenant was thinking, telling me, oh, write him up for being out of bounds. And I'm like, being out of bounds? No, this is preparation to escape. He goes to the hole for this. And, I really had to fight hard and plead my case. And I just knew at the time that, someone's making a mistake here. You don't just write a guy who's trying to hide out that charge for, out of bounds. And so I'll always remember that. So, find what the charge is. And the way we do that is, getting back to a little more of the practicality here is the things that you find that are evidence have to support what the definition of the charge is, right? And so you go ahead and you do everything that you can, and you do throw that kitchen sink in there with good evidence. You're not chasing the charge or whatever, so that in case they don't find him for the higher charge, they can still find him for a lesser included offense. So when you have something that's like that out of bounds that I mentioned, right? That particular inmate was indeed out of bounds, but only as part of a lesser included offense because he was also trying to escape. So make sure that you can take those, though, and the elements of the crime are the elements of the actual definition of what the crime is within your penal code and within your policy and within your procedure. So just make sure you don't do it wrong, because otherwise you won't be able to support the charge, and that particular individual is going to get off because those elements weren't included.
Yeah, I want to mention something too, by the way, because you're spot on. Like, let's say you have two inmates that are fighting, and for some reason, you have a soft disciplinary hearing, whatever it is, and let's say they may drop the charge of the fight. But let's say one of the inmates was out of bounds. They went to the other inmate's cell. When you write the charge, some people will write the main charge and say, hey, that's good enough. I wrote them for fighting. But then the problem is if the fighting charge drops, you got nothing. So I do think that you should look at the whole situation and write what really is obvious. So again, let's break it down. They were fighting. Where were they fighting? In Russ Hamilton's cell. Well, where does Gangi live? Gangi lives on the other side. Okay, so Gangi on top of the fighting charge is going to get an out of bounds. Oh, when did this happen? Oh, it happened during one of our movements. Okay, we're going to get writing disturbing a movement or the orderly operations. I mean, if you can't get the bigger charge, you could get the smaller ones. Or, hey, they were told twice to stop fighting. They refused. So they're also going to get disobeying a direct order. It's not throwing it literally are the smaller things that could hold weight if they drop the bigger charge. So think about everything you've done. Got two inmates fighting. Hey, Russ, Gangi, stop. They're not stopping. That's going to be my disobeying a direct charge. Gangi's out of bounds. He was in Russ's cell. Gangi's getting hit up with this. And again, it's not the kitchen sink. It's more of, this is exactly the breakdown of the incident. This is exactly, our efforts in trying to stop it. Because don't forget, guys, the charge is not always about holding the inmate accountable. Yes, that's a big part of it, but it's also about documenting your efforts. So think about that. Think about that. I wrote the inmate a charge for, disobeying a direct order because I told them to stop fighting. So now let's say you get one inmate that was badly assaulted or badly banged up. you could see an effort in the charge that both of them did not stop fighting when we came on the scene. And again, obviously, there would always have to be a response, but so you're not just jumping in and stopping them from fighting. That's why the verbal matters. Or it also documents the fact of why I had to use my OC, because I'm spraying my OC, and of course I'm giving effort. Guys, stop, no, but they're getting a charge now. I'm going to write them up for not stopping, because when I write them up the charge for not stopping, that's going to help justify my next level of force in that continuum. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah, and also just to go back to that a little bit, sometimes one particular little bit of information can also make the difference in doing something like identifying who an aggressor was. You have an inmate that's out of bounds in somebody else's cell with a fight going on. I think it's a lot easier to take and make that individual the aggressor than it is to try and make the other one the aggressor. So just always know that, the amount of information that you put in might seem a little bit too over the top when you're doing it then. But when it comes down to the hearing or whatever, one little bit of information might make the difference in that actual hearing. So don't be afraid to go in there and actually, get busy documenting every single little thing that you can. I've had supervisors tell me, "Oh, that's too much." I go, "No, it's not too much. This is our bread and butter. This is what we're doing to try and make sure that we do produce that good product. So, don't put it back on us and tell us that you want less when you're turning around and you're letting everybody off." You're mute. You're mute. I got you.
You got me.
I got you.
Guys, this is not blindly throwing things out of dartboard in the hope that they stick. This is legit stuff that should be sticking. I want to give you one more scenario too that I think could work. You get a lot of inmates that, let's say, put in for medical, and then maybe the medical appointment is at the same time that yard goes out. So now the inmate is thinking, well, I'd rather go to yard. And what they do is they miss the medical appointment. And then what they do is they lie, and then they say that the officer never let me out. That's why I missed the medical appointment. The officer never let me out. So what we tend to do is, if you have a medical appointment, which has been solidified and you're aware, right, you need to be at medical. So here's what happens here. If that person doesn't go to medical, if for some reason they don't find their way to medical, he will get charged for missing an appointment. And then because he's at medical, now mind you, the medical team is the one, at least for us, it depends on your facility, because some facilities, they can't write the charges. In our facility, they could to some level, yes. But not all facilities allow that. But some facilities do. Medical will go ahead and write the report. And in some cases, they could write the charge, or they could write a report that will help the charge. Either way, that the person missed their appointment. Now, custody comes in, sees that the inmate is still there and still in the housing unit, and writes the inmate up for an out of bounds because they're supposed to be at the medical appointment. So again, it shows support, because at the end of the day, when they miss the appointment, they try to throw the officer under the bus, saying, well, the officer never let me out. And no, that's not true, because I asked for you to go. You said no. At this point, you were supposed to be at medical. So you were charged for not going to medical, because that was an appointment that you made with medical, and you were told the night before that you had to go to medical. So they're aware of it. And again, it's not just throwing things in the hopes that it gets hit. It's, these are things that will matter, because they'll support. They tend to support each other, and most likely you probably get one or two things, but it still supports what it is that you're trying to do, the overall outcome of what you're trying to produce. And one thing when it also comes to proper documentation, guys, and this is a quick 101. We've done videos on this multiple times before. When you write your report, specific time, date, where it happened, who was involved, what your actions were, whatever it is. And then you don't really want to go into the why or the motives behind things. I mean, let the hearing officer or the investigator, let them figure it out. Your job is to specifically report the facts to a point where it cannot be denied. What time did it happen? It happened at this time. This is when it happened. This is where it happened. This is who was involved, what was found on the scene, blah, blah, blah. And then again, just being as specific as possible. Russ, any thoughts on that real quick before we go to that last tip?
Yeah, generally it's true that we don't get caught up in the why. What we can do sometimes though is we can turn in the types of evidence that may support a motive. We can't always talk to motive because I'll tell you what, just honestly, a lot of times these guys hide what their motives are. And so we don't know why. Why did he go and stab that guy? Well, he was told by his gang to go do that. Maybe it was a personal beef among them. Usually, we can't figure that out because there's too many snitches that are going to lie to us. And then number two is there's too many different things that it could have been. But sometimes we can find information that will support a motive, and we should put that in as long as we have a way to prove that it's reliable.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, we're talking about at that point, we're talking about the report that supplements the charge, because at that point, the charge is going to be as specific as possible to kind of hold those people responsible. Again, you're going to note the charge, the official charge that was broken, and then basically the specific actions of what led to that, where, when, blah blah blah. If there is a why, now that Russ got me thinking of it, on the report that supplements the charge, so the report. The why could be utilized to justify your actions, though, as the staff member. Let me get that clear, because you may have to have committed to a use of force or whatever actions it is. So at that point, because you know why you did what you did, it's okay for you to put your why in to justify your actions, so it makes it clear for those that are going to review at every level. So you're right, there is a why, but the why on the report is usually to help you make your story a little bit better in regards to the actions that you took. But like Russ said,
we sometimes have to explain our why, like you said, especially within a use of force. If I'm wrestling with a guy on the ground, and obviously, maybe not obviously, we might want to say, at this point, while we were on the ground, I had not yet searched this individual. He was reaching for, something in his waistband. I could tell there was an object there. And so I did X, Y, and Z. I'm just going to leave out what those things could be. And then later you find out, it was a little brick of dope and not something dangerous to you, but you don't know that at the time, right? We have to act on information at that moment in time before we know what it is. He wasn't complying with orders. There was definitely something in his waistband. He was reaching for it. So how do I justify my actions? So that part of the why we do know, because we're inside our own heads, and then we're able to actually articulate why we took the actions that we took to make those comport with policy, procedure, state law, case law.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, that part of the report doesn't go into the charge. That goes into your report, because I don't know how most facilities operate, but if the inmate later on goes to challenge for due process, those reports may not be allowed for the inmate to review. That may be given to, if the hearing officer needs it, that's fine. But some of the reasons behind our choices may not be for an inmate to actually know, because there could be security concerns behind that. So the specific the charge, the better. That's what they can lean on. If need be, the hearing officer needs a little more information. They could work with you or the investigative agency to find out what they're able to look at to support the charge that you wrote. But the operations reports, the stuff that has the why behind your actions or behind information that was discovered, usually should not be allowed for the inmate to take a look at when they are defending themselves for an institutional charge. Notice I said an institutional charge. That doesn't mean that it can't be taken into account. I mean, that paperwork may be able to be seen in private with the person that's the objective hearing officer, but it may not be meant for the inmate's eyes, depending on if there's a security or safety and security concern. So I do know that the charge, keep it specific, the operations reports, explain, what your efforts are, and then, kind of let the chips fall where they may. But would you agree with that latter part that I just said, Russ? Because not everything that's put in that packet can be called for the inmate when they're defending against the charge.
In my particular department, CDCR, basically they would have access to everything except confidential human sources. And so we would have to provide them with everything in the incident package. We would have to provide them with every single report every time. I understand why some places, and maybe that would have been nice to operate under that, but we just kind of like had this sunshine provision where they basically got everything no matter what. But I do know that there are other places that, are, a little bit closer to the vest, but unfortunately not in CDCR.
Yeah, we have a practice where if there's intelligence that could jeopardize something, maybe an ongoing investigation that's outside of that immediate charge, but was relevant to the charge, it's not gonna be so quick for an inmate to request that, because that information could be confidential or could lead to a source. I mean, that could be another thing too, where, they may say, well, I'll give you another stupid example, but, some inmates may say that they're constantly being harassed, like when you do searches and stuff like that, and they don't want to be targeted. And sometimes, sad to say, you have to sometimes justify why you're searching an individual, especially if it's been like multiple times a month. Why are you searching this person every day? What's going on? Are you searching everyone else every day? What makes this person particular? Like, why are you going after this person? Well, I'm not going to want the inmate to know that. If there's a legit reason, I'm not going to want the inmate to know that. So I may go ahead and, talk to someone in confidence about why I'm doing what I'm doing. But if the inmate requests for that report or whatever it is that I have to write, that may not be given to that individual, because if I wrote that inmate up, let's say, because I found contraband there, and the inmate says, well, it's bullshit because you're searching my area 20 times a week, whatever it is. And then the hearing officer may come up and say, well, why are you searching area? Hey, I'll talk, but this is maybe for your ears if I have to give you something, but it's not going to be for the inmate's ears. But with that said, again, there are certain levels of protection when you have to justify the why. That's all I'm saying. When you go to justify the why, there's got to be some levels of protection, what you're willing to give up when an inmate is defending what could be ultimately an institutional charge, but minor in the long run. Let's be honest with that. It could be something severe for the facility, whatever it is, but minor in the long run of what they could really be chasing after. So again, when you come to justifying the why, that may not be so available to the inmate. And that's kind of crosses into the provide for due process. And I kind of crossed into it a little bit of a caveat, but all right, Russ. So let's explain this, because this is important, because this really comes where the balance of why inmates are beating charges to some extent.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we see all the time is that due process has been instated into almost all of our disciplinary processes. And so that means that due process is part of what someone somewhere has decided that the Constitution gives to the inmate as an absolute right. And that means that we can't break those due process bonds without some forfeiture on our part. Usually that forfeiture means that that maybe we can find them guilty, but we can't take any time away from them, or we can't impose any sanctions. Just as for instance, what we sometimes see is that there'll be due process that involves time constraint. Okay, so those time constraints could end up hurting your case. Let's say you have 5 days or 10 days to serve the inmate once an investigation is done with whatever the charge is, and you don't do that, chances are that you're going to absolutely lose that case. you're going to lose that opportunity, and you're not going to be able to get that pound of flesh, so to speak, out of them. Other things that you have to do with regards to due process is you have to give them the evidence, and that's all of the evidence that you have, so that they have a chance to actually look at it and design and build themselves a defense for what you're charging them for. The other thing that you have to take into consideration is what has happened if this inmate has a pretty serious charge against him, and you have removed him from the general population and you put him in administrative segregation, restorative housing, whatever you want to call it, right? And so all of the other inmates that were in that area at the time, he doesn't have access to take down any of the information that they may have seen or known about. So what do you have to do? Then you generally have to provide that inmate with some type of investigative employee that can go and conduct the interviews and stuff of potential witnesses. And that also means, witnesses for the defense and witnesses for the prosecution, so to speak, and be an actual, not an advocate for the inmate, but someone who goes out there and helps them prepare the evidence and gather the evidence in their stead, because they're no longer able to do that. You cannot deny an inmate the opportunity to do that. Otherwise, you will lose that case when it comes back up for review. And so if you found them guilty, then it's just going to be too bad. The 180 days or whatever you took from them, you're just going to lose that.
Yeah, and guys, when an inmate is written up, we're talking about institutional charges. We're not talking about. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I thought I was like, all right. I see you going like this. I'm like, oh, hey, what happened? So when we're talking about institutional charges, these are charges that are dealt with at the facility level. Granted, there could be appeal processes. When there is a final appeal, if it does get exhausted and admin supports the charge, sometimes the inmate could travel up to the higher court system, in which now they could get legal counsel if they want, that could then represent them. Most facilities don't allow legal counsel in the institutional hearings. And what I mean by that is hearings that relate to institutional charges. Usually you can give them a paralegal, or sometimes they could get a representative from like the education department or whatnot. And again, they're meant to represent them objectively. And what I mean by that is the people that represent them are not there for any findings of guilt or innocent, but rather represent them in regards to their due process. Are we in compliance with their due process? Kind of what Russ said. When the inmate finally gets heard, there are time frames in when they are supposed to have their case heard. Usually if they've been written with a charge that requires their removal from their housing area and placed in some type of restorative housing, those are the inmates that are going to have to get heard faster. And then the inmates that are kind of charged, but they can remain in their housing unit until the case can be reviewed, there's a little bit more time to hear their case, but there is a time frame. And then when it goes into the hearing, you can have either it's supposed to be an objective party, whether it's appointed by, some cases could be appointed by a commissioner, it could be someone of rank. If that's the case, as long as it's one level up from who wrote the charge. So if it's a charge written from an officer, then sergeant or above, it's from a sergeant, lieutenant or above, and vice versa, because you really don't want them to be in the same rank. But it's mostly the best process to do this, to be honest with you guys, and to keep things fair and less argumentative, is if you could have someone that's not appointed from the facility level. It should be someone that comes from the highest level, maybe someone from the central office region that comes in and listens to the cases if possible. Or if you are going to do it at the facility level, because, that's how it's structured, then it shouldn't be a one-person team. It should be like a three-person team. Maybe someone from custody, someone from education, someone from, I don't know, whatever, just a representative, three representatives to kind of balance out. So if it does get, and the reason why I'm saying this is because if it does get appealed outside of the facility, all these ways to make things objective matter. It matters in regards to the fairness of how you're handling out the inmate's case. The inmate is able to request for video if needed. If there's custody witnesses, The inmate may be allowed to call them to go ahead and challenge their perspective. There are some agencies that don't allow for that level of confrontation, but do request written reports from the custody side of things or from the staff side of things. But some people do say, hey, I need staff available. And then at some point, what's going to happen is there could be some, cross-examination, if you will, by the inmate or the paralegal. But what most respectful agency does when it comes to that is the inmate has to submit the questions beforehand. And then basically these are the questions that are going to be asked, and that's it. Those are just the questions that we need to ask for clarity. Now, granted, I want to mention one thing, though, guys. If you're being called because it's a request from the hearing officer to keep things fair, communicate, get your thoughts out. Don't rush it. Don't push the hearing officer aside. I mean, this is part of the follow-up. This is part of the due process. You don't all because you're being, I was like, this is bullshit. I can't believe they're calling me for that. They have to. So when you go in and do it, present yourself accordingly, state your case, put it on the record. But the last thing you want to do is, nope, I don't want to be involved in that, or write something stupid that doesn't hold any weight. And then when the inmate beats the charge, you get all upset. But it's like, hey, I tried to call you down. It was requested. I needed you to come down because you wrote a report that the inmate's trying to contest. And without you being there, it's hard to get the validity. We need you to go ahead and defend about 2 or 3 parts of your report. Now, granted, we are sworn, at least the custody side, so we do have a heightened level of trust. But when it comes to that hearing, everything equals out, believe it or not. So if you have a great report and, the inmate has a concern with 3 or 4 things that you wrote, the hearing officer may say, hey, in an effort to keep things fair, I'm going to need you to come down, and these are 4 questions I want you to answer. And then sometimes you see that the people, they either refuse to go, which, sometimes they can, unfortunately, the inmate's going to wind up beating the charge, or if they're given the questions ahead of time just to submit a report, this is a waste of my time. And they dog it. And they just don't provide enough information. And then the inmate winds up beating the charge because there wasn't enough effort in the follow-up. You agree with that, Russ? Because that happens.
Yeah. That's just kind of what happens sometimes in the procedural, sometimes the inmate can decide that they want, the report writer there. A lot of times they'll choose not to because they think that if they throw enough bullshit up there, it won't be countered. So you see a lot of that. Sometimes the hearing officer will say, "Well, you know what? I want the primary officer in here anyway," and we'll bring him in just for clarity, and use that as a way to kind of snuff out some of the drama that these inmates will pull. There's a lot of different aspects to it. I think the real thing that I'm trying to say with regards to due process, though, is ensure that it happens. Different institutions have different ideas about the way things go and who's the hearing officer and whether they have a staff assistant or an investigative employee. That's all just dressing for the way due process plays out. The most important thing is that you adhere to the guidelines of whatever's going on in your state, your department, whatever, in order to make sure that you can get the best chance at getting, that guilty finding out of it. And so just make sure that your game is solid and that you know what those things are and why they exist in the first place, man. You guys should be out there trying to look up a little bit of, case law and stuff to see how these things played out and why due process is so important.
Yeah, guys, when it comes to the due process, think objectively. If there's something there that can help the inmate or damn the inmate, whatever the case may be, if they're entitled to it, you got to give it. That's the key. If it's in your hands, you got to give it, unless it violates some level of further safety and security. And at that point here, it will be told to the inmate, at this point, you can't request that. That will violate ABCD, but feel free to look at the other stuff that we provided. I mean, that's really the key. So again, you got to provide what you can, unless it violates safety and security. Even with the other thing, when it comes to they're questioning the charge, they may come out and question. They may question your specifics as, how do you know it was me? How do you know that was the time? How do you know that's where it had? I mean, because again, they're getting the charge or specific. That should be very easy for you to answer. I know it was you because I worked that unit every day. I went in, I'm the one that collected your ID, whatever it is to validate, I mean, the point is when you write your charges based on those specifics, they're going to be easy to defend when they get challenged. So you're going to be able to answer those questions pretty well. Now, when you start going into the ambiguous stuff, then that's what they'll focus on. Because by the way, guys, I just want to mention something. Most of these inmates, when they do something foolish, they know they're wrong. And what they do is when they try to do these hearings, they attack your credibility. They're not even focusing really on whether you could prove that they were right or wrong. They start attacking you or your character, your ability in observation, your ability to do your job and be effective. So at the end of the day, some of these inmates that think that, oh, I beat a charge, that must mean I'm innocent. No, that doesn't mean you're innocent. It doesn't. It just, unfortunately, here, there wasn't enough to support it, or, there was a due process error, or it gets downgraded. Oh, I was found not guilty. No, you were found guilty. It just, the charge got downgraded to like maybe an on the spot or an immediate, But having said that, guys, I just want you to know when you go in, and if you are preparing to defend your situation, if you have to, stick to the facts. Don't let the inmate take you off course. If the question is irrelevant, it's irrelevant. And for the hearing officers, you should be able to know that. You should be able to know that, hey, we're traveling too far off right here. Dialogue's done, or you got to get back on track, because these questions here don't even pertain to anything that relates to your guilt. It's more about, I'll give you another thing. This officer here has a habit of just writing everyone. Okay, what does that mean? Like, why is that even brought up? Again, that's a credibility attack. That doesn't mean that, even if I do have a habit of writing everyone, does that mean when I wrote you that you didn't deserve it? It's irrelevant. So again, just be careful that you don't, go into too deep in things that are off course, like I'm kind of doing now. And then, lose track of what the dialogue is. Sorry, sort of, but I know it made sense, Russ. I know you know what I was talking about, because
I know what you're talking about, but just stick to the facts, man. Just
stick
to
the facts. Drag that Friday, and what was his partner's name? Thursday.
Yeah, I think that was it. Joe Friday, I don't know what it was.
Joe Friday and Russ Wednesday.
Hey, Russ, one of those.
You have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I would just like to say, hey guys, get out there and use the disciplinary process to leverage yourself, to make yourself a better officer, a better component of what correctional law enforcement is all about, and make your place safer. And, one of the things that I was blessed in doing over the years, was not only doing that job, as a disciplinary officer, but later on, as a sergeant, actually functioning as an administrative law judge in hearing what these charges were and so forth. So just know that, find out what your process is, and then just take it to its maximum height, if you will. And, really learn how to hold those disciplinary officers' feet to the fire by writing really good reports.
Yeah, and guys, the dialogue we teach here, guys, I mean, that comes from years of experience. These are things that we didn't learn in our first day on the job. These are things that we learned through trial and error that, helped us. And hopefully, you get this information at the beginning of your career, wherever you're at now, it helps you immediately. So again, it's great to have 20 years here, 29, 30 years on the other side here. But what's great about it, guys, is it's not years in isolation. Me and Russ are blending our experiences to truly make 50 years. I mean, if that makes sense. It's not 20 years and 30. We're sharing our experiences, building off each other's dialogue, and then presenting it to you in a nice, neat package that you can unwrap and hopefully find use for. And hopefully you don't ask for the gift receipt, because I don't know any way we can give that gift back in. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.